Some stories begin with an argument. There are stories that begin with a betrayal. But my story begins with a young man standing in the middle of my living room, lifting my wife's bourbon and asking me, "What is a man like you doing in our resort house?" That was the moment I understood. It wasn't the coldest Aspen snow that night. It was the words from the very son I had raised for 30 years. And what froze my heart wasn't the question, but the way he said it in front of 11 strangers, with eyes that saw me as an intruder, as some lowlife who had wandered into the luxury he tried to build on borrowed reputation. That night, I realized sometimes the one who hurts you most isn't the stranger breaking down your door, but the one who shares your blood, standing before a crowd, pretending you never existed. If this story makes you pause even for a beat, leave and tell me which city you're listening from. And if you want to follow the next parts, just hit follow and turn on notifications whenever it feels right. Thank you for staying with me. Allow me to continue my story. I've always believed people only truly see the nature of a year when they reach its final days. And for me, that year, the year when 3 major architectural projects collapsed out of nowhere, clients threatened to sue, partners turned their backs, fell apart like a row of dominoes someone pushed over with careless fingers. By December, I no longer recognized the reflection in my office mirror. The gray-haired man with dark circles under his eyes, hands that once patiently set every stone and every beam, now trembled whenever he signed another crisis report. That afternoon, I left the office of Whitlock and Pierce in downtown Aspen, where I had just signed updates to my estate documents. The new deed, the ownership confirmation, the trust files, things people only arrange when uncertainty starts circling their life. I placed the thick folder on the passenger seat, adjusted my belt, and drove my old Tahoe toward Timber Creek Road, leading up to Aspen Highlands. I wanted to leave the world behind, at least for 4 days. Just me, the snow, the cabin, and the silence I had lacked all year. First, snow fell like chalk dust on the windshield, each white speck melting on the warmed glass. The mountain road curled through tall pines and bare aspen forests whose pale trunks looked like smudged ink stains. The radio played an old Alan Jackson country track, his deep, familiar voice touching a place I had tried to forget. The scent of old leather mixed with cold snow reminded me of Laura, the woman who helped me build Hawthorne Ridge Lodge with our own hands, and long afternoons steeped in the smell of pine resin. 14 years ago, Laura stood at the ridge looking down the valley and said, "Rich, this place feels like where the world steps back so we can breathe." I remember that line clearly, and I remember her eyes when she set this first stone into the fireplace base. The last time we were at the cabin was a late September evening, aspen gold fading, just before she died of cancer. Since then, Hawthorne Ridge Lodge became the place I returned to and hid from, half for Laura, half for myself. As the car climbed the steeper stretch, the sky darkened. The Highlands Range blurred into silver mist, dotted with lights like stars sleeping on the mountainside. I breathed deeply, the scent of snow, pine, cold stone, the smell only Aspen has. But that peace didn't last. About 200 meters from the cabin, I saw lights flickering through the pines, too bright, too vivid to be the porch sensors. I leaned forward to see better. Then my heart tightened. 3 unfamiliar cars sat in the dark, snow soft on their roofs. A bright red Alfa Romeo, a white Highlander, and a brand new Ford Bronco. None belonged to me. No one, except me and the National Forest Ranger, had any right to be here. My hand tightened around the wheel. No, it couldn't be. When I stopped the car at the porch, a cold feeling ran down my spine. The emergency lockbox by the wooden steps, the one holding the spare key only Aiden and I knew about, was pried open, the metal hook bent as if someone had yanked it hard. I crouched down, my fingertips touching the damp snow, clinging to the edge of the box. It had been opened recently, very recently. From inside the cabin, through the glass, warm light spilled in wide patches. Then sounds that did not belong in this cabin came through the cracked door. Latin music, loud laughter, clinking glasses. I stood still. My cabin, my sanctuary, mine and Laura's, was being used as a party house. And that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the porch door. Wasn't locked. I pushed it gently. It opened with the familiar creak that now sounded sharp, like a warning. Warm air washed out, carrying the smell of food, wine, and the messy scent of intrusion. In the living room, under the warm lights, the kind Laura loved, I saw at least 8 people standing around the fireplace, drinking, chatting. Someone had moved my leather chair all the way to the back of the room. The coffee table was cluttered with bottles. Red string lights were hung where Laura's photo used to be. I opened my mouth to speak, but a voice cut across the room. Sharp, acidic, confident as if he owned the place. Aiden's voice, my son. He looked at me from beside the fireplace with the eyes of a man seeing a stranger. What is a man like you doing in our resort house? My heart sank, not because of the words, but because of how he said them, as if I didn't exist in his life, as if he had never grown up in my arms in this very cabin, as if the distance between us, after 2 years of silence, had become a canyon that could never be bridged. I stood there in a room full of strangers and understood. Everything had only just begun. I didn't answer Aiden's question right away, not because I didn't know what to say, but because in the middle of the Latin music, the clinking glasses, and the strange smell of alcohol spreading through the air, an old memory suddenly pulled me back 14 years to the day we placed the first stone on the fireplace base, the day Laura still stood beside me, her soft brown eyes reflecting the whole Colorado sky. That year, Aiden was still a rebellious 18-year-old, with average grades, but always talking about the dream of escaping that tiny town where everyone knows everyone. And Laura and I were at the peak of our architecture careers. Our hand-drawn timber home designs had once been featured in a well-known mountain interior magazine. One autumn afternoon, while climbing the slope to find the best view of the Maroon Valley, Laura pointed to a flat patch of ground covered in weeds. Here, she said. Put the cabin here, and the morning light will shine straight through the glass into the living room. I want to wake up and see the Pine Ridge first. I looked where she pointed. It was true. Morning light slid down from the Highlands Peak like a ribbon of silver. It was a piece of land no map marked, but Laura saw what others ignored. We'll build it by hand, she added. I laughed. Laura, you're the only woman who thinks hauling stone, sawing wood, and wading through snow is a romantic getaway. Laura tossed her hair back and smiled that smile that could soften me any time. Rich, you know, things made by hand always have a soul. I remember the day we set the first stones for the fireplace base. The sun hadn't risen, the wind was brutally cold, and we stood on bare ground with 2 pairs of thick gloves. Laura held each stone for me, brushing off the red dust on the edges with her wool gloves, as if she were cradling something precious. In the cabin now, right behind me, the fireplace is still there. Still the same stones, still the shape Laura wanted. But earlier, among the chaotic decorations of those strangers, I saw them hang bright colored lights on that very fireplace, as if it were just a photo backdrop. No one knew each stone had once been set by the hands of the woman I loved. 5 years after the cabin was finished, Laura was diagnosed with cancer. It progressed fast, violently. The hospital in Denver gave us small doses of hope, then took them away. By the 8th month, Laura said, Rich, I want to go back to the cabin. We brought her to Hawthorne Ridge Lodge on a day so cold the ground froze from dawn. In her final weeks, Laura lay on the pine bed I had built myself, beside the wide glass window overlooking the valley. Every morning, sunlight poured through the exact frame she had chosen 10 years earlier. I sat beside her bed, holding her hand, and many times wondered, if I could trade this cabin to pull her back from the edge, I would do it without hesitation. The day she died, wind pounded the window like the forest, exhaling, and from that moment, Hawthorne Ridge Lodge was no longer a cabin. It became what was left of Laura. The last part. A week before she passed, Laura asked me to call the lawyer to the cabin, Thomas Whitlock. We signed the final documents. She placed the lodge entirely in my name, not split, not leaving any portion to Aidan. Whitlock looked at me in surprise. Laura only shook her head. Richard will know how to use this cabin to keep the family in the right direction. And when only the two of us were left in the room, Laura said the sentence I have never forgotten. If one day Aidan disrespects you, then stop protecting him. The more you shield him, the less he'll grow. It's time he learns to be responsible. I never thought that sentence could become real until tonight. A loud laugh pulled me back to the present room. I blinked, the cabin from 14 years ago fading, replaced by the raw reality in front of me. Aidan was still standing by the fireplace, the place that had once been Laura's sanctuary, but now he held a glass of red wine, looking every bit the host. Around him were strangers, talking loudly, completely unaware they were standing in the place where the best woman in my life had taken her final breaths. I didn't answer Aidan's question right away, not because I didn't know what to say, but because in the middle of the Latin music, the clinking glasses and the strange smell of alcohol spreading through the air, an old memory suddenly pulled me back 14 years to the day we placed the first stone on the fireplace base. The day Laura still stood beside me, her soft brown eyes reflecting the whole Colorado sky. That year, Aidan was still a rebellious 18-year-old, with average grades, but always talking about the dream of escaping that tiny town where everyone knows everyone. And Laura and I were at the peak of our architecture careers. Our hand-drawn timber home designs had once been featured in a well-known mountain interior magazine. One autumn afternoon, while climbing the slope to find the best view of the Maroon Valley, Laura pointed to a flat patch of ground covered in weeds. "Here," she said. "Put the cabin here, and the morning light will shine straight through the glass into the living room. I want to wake up and see the Pine Ridge first." I looked where she pointed. It was true. Morning light slid down from the Highlands Peak like a ribbon of silver. It was a piece of land no map marked, but Laura saw what others ignored. "We'll build it by hand," she added. I laughed. "Laura, you're the only woman who thinks hauling stone, sawing wood, and wading through snow is a romantic getaway." Laura tossed her hair back and smiled that smile that could soften me any time. "Rich, you know, things made by hand always have a soul." I remember the day we set the first stones for the fireplace base. The sun hadn't risen, the wind was brutally cold, and we stood on bare ground with 2 pairs of thick gloves. Laura held each stone for me, brushing off the red dust on the edges with her wool gloves, as if she were cradling something precious. In the cabin now, right behind me, the fireplace is still there. Still the same stones, still the shape Laura wanted. But earlier, among the chaotic decorations of those strangers, I saw them hang bright colored lights on that very fireplace, as if it were just a photo backdrop. No one knew each stone had once been set by the hands of the woman I loved. 5 years after the cabin was finished, Laura was diagnosed with cancer. It progressed fast, violently. The hospital in Denver gave us small doses of hope, then took them away. By the 8th month, Laura said, "Rich, I want to go back to the cabin." We brought her to Hawthorne Ridge Lodge on a day so cold the ground froze from dawn. In her final weeks, Laura lay on the pine bed I had built myself, beside the wide glass window overlooking the valley. Every morning, sunlight poured through the exact frame she had chosen 10 years earlier. I sat beside her bed, holding her hand, and many times wondered, if I could trade this cabin to pull her back from the edge, I would do it without hesitation. The day she died, wind pounded the window like the forest exhaling, and from that moment, Hawthorne Ridge Lodge was no longer a cabin. It became what was left of Laura, the last part. A week before she passed, Laura asked me to call the lawyer to the cabin, Thomas Whitlock. We signed the final documents. She placed the lodge entirely in my name, not split, not leaving any portion to Aidan. Whitlock looked at me in surprise. Laura only shook her head. Richard will know how to use this cabin to keep the family in the right direction. And when only the two of us were left in the room, Laura said the sentence I have never forgotten. If one day Aidan disrespects you, then stop protecting him. The more you shield him, the less he'll grow. It's time he learns to be responsible. I never thought that sentence could become real. Until tonight. A loud laugh pulled me back to the present room. I blinked, the cabin from 14 years ago fading, replaced by the raw reality in front of me. Aidan was still standing by the fireplace, the place that had once been Laura's sanctuary, but now he held a glass of red wine, looking every bit the host. Around him were strangers, talking loudly, completely unaware they were standing in the place where the best woman in my life had taken her final breaths. The pinewood door, left slightly ajar, opened wider as I stepped fully into the living room. And it wasn't 7 people, as I had first thought. There were 11, each one using my cabin like a buzzing party hub in the middle of Christmas week. The warm yellow lights, the kind Laura loved most, cast a fake glow on their skin, making the whole scene look like a glossy spread in a travel magazine, except every inch of that space was my home, built by my hands and Laura's. And these people, every single one, were lounging on the very things Laura had chosen, with the care of someone who saw home as part of her soul. The first thing I noticed was the empty spot on the wooden wall to the right of the fireplace, where Laura's photo, our 25th anniversary portrait, had hung for over a decade. The photo was gone. The frame hooks were still there, leaving behind a paler square of wood, like a scar where someone had torn a piece of skin away from the body. I scanned the room, and I saw it. The photo had been taken down and was lying face down behind the liquor cabinet, the edge of the frame touching the floor, smeared with a bit of snack crumbs someone had dropped. Laura, the woman who had chosen every wooden peg to finish this cabin, was now lying face down on the floor, like some extra decoration these revelers found unnecessary. I didn't know if I held back a sigh or swallowed it with the metallic taste in my throat. Then I saw Aidan. He stepped out from the kitchen corner, holding the 15-year bourbon Laura had given me on the last anniversary before she got sick. I had kept that bottle sealed, untouched. Aidan tilted it, pouring it into a crystal glass as casually as if it were tap water, laughing with his wife's group of friends. Maya placed a hand on Aidan's chest, watching me warily. "Aidan, who is that? Why is he in our house?" I heard the words "our house" clearly. When he turned toward the fireplace and his eyes hit mine, for half a second Aidan panicked. His face went pale. His hand tightened around the glass so hard I heard crystal knock against crystal. The last time I saw that look on him was when he broke the car's back window at 16 and feared Laura's reaction, but the fear vanished so fast I wondered if I imagined it. In less than a second his face hardened, his lips pressed into a thin line, then loosened into the cold smile of a man performing for a crowd. He chose to attack. He always chose that whenever he didn't know what to do. "You? Who are you?" Aidan asked, his voice higher than usual, trying to choke down the tremor. "Who gave you permission to enter our house?" From the left corner of the room, Miguel, Aidan's father-in-law, lifted his phone to record. Elena next to him turned on her camera. Carlos, Maya's younger brother, slid his chair back to film from another angle. They thought they were witnessing an intruder break-in. The awful part was that Aidan wanted them to believe it. I opened my mouth. "Aidan!" Before I could finish, he cut me off with a voice full of venom. "Don't say my name. You have no right." The air in the cabin dropped. The Latin music still played, but it sounded strangled under the weight of something dirty and heavy. Aiden glanced around and pointed at me in front of the whole group. He's a stranger in my house. A failure. A washed-up failure who's just pathetic. The whole room fell silent. A few people exchanged glances, unsure if they should laugh. Maya rushed forward to shield Aiden as if I were a threat. "Don't go near my husband!" Her voice rang loud, shrill over the music. A girl by the kitchen tilted her head and murmured, just loud enough for me to hear, "He looks kinda homeless, doesn't he?" I had heard harsh words before, from clients, partners, from people who saw architecture as nothing but a commodity. But never had I heard such words from the mouth of the son I had raised for 32 years. I looked at Aiden for a long time. He avoided my gaze, turning to Miguel, trying to look calm. "Miguel, don't worry. I can handle it. He's got problems?" Miguel, normally a steady man, frowned. "But how does he know the code? You said only your family had it." Aiden froze for a split second. I saw his throat twitch. He forced a crooked smile. "He's been watching the house. People like that can do anything." The words, "people like that," hit the wooden floor like a stone thrown in my face. I said nothing, just stood there, silent, watching my son craft a story in front of 10 people, all of them recording. Silence always scares a liar. Aiden knew that, and he spoke louder, more confident. "He's trespassing. This is my family's cabin." No one responded right away. The phones kept recording. Someone turned on the flash. Carlos stepped back farther to get a wide shot. Aiden walked closer to me, lowering his face slightly as if he wanted to pin me against the wall in front of the entire room. "You don't belong here. You don't belong in my life. No one here even knows who you are." I felt my whole body go cold, not because of the insult, but because of the cruel truth. Aiden was right. Here, in the very cabin I built with my own hands, people looked at me like a man who had wandered in by mistake. I lifted my eyes and scanned the room. 11 unfamiliar faces stared back at me, some tense and wary as if they feared I was about to cause trouble, some amused, seeing me as nothing more than a dramatic twist in their party. Others frowned, annoyed and contemptuous, as if my presence dirtied the air in the lodge. Then I looked toward the liquor cabinet, where Laura's photo lay face down on the floor, as if even her presence had been erased from Aiden's life. I stood still, and in that moment I knew. What would happen next wasn't going to be a confrontation. It was going to be a judgment. Not Aiden's judgment on me, but life's judgment on him. The air in the cabin sagged as Aiden's outburst echoed through the room. But behind his aggression on the Santiago family's side, there began to appear looks mixed with confusion and caution, expressions Richard had never seen before. These people were not the type to believe anything after just a few loud words, and right as Aiden tried to keep performing his role, pieces of the lie he had built for 2 years began slipping out. Carmen gripped her husband's arm and lowered her voice. "You said he's a stranger, but how does he know your name?" Aiden shot me a sharp glance, then quickly turned toward his wife, speaking fast and low. "Just trust me, okay? He's guessing. Don't let him scare you." But Miguel, the calmest man in the group, was not so easily convinced. He adjusted his glasses, looking from me to Aiden, his eyes analyzing every small detail. "Aiden," Miguel said slowly, "you said he was stalking you. But how would someone stalking you know about the spare key under the step? You told us only your family knew that spot." Aiden stiffened for a moment. "And also," Miguel continued, looking at Richard, "I noticed he turned on the auxiliary lights correctly on the first try. How would a stranger know that?" That was the moment everyone felt it, a tightened string beginning to vibrate. Aiden immediately forced a smile, his voice rising, clearly trying to overwhelm the room. "He's been watching us. You don't get it. Guys like him, they could have sneaked in for a whole week waiting to scare people like this." But his frantic explanation only made the others more confused. Elena, the elegant woman always beside Miguel, set her glass gently on the granite counter and said, "Aiden, you've never once mentioned your father. You said he left when you were a kid. Isn't that right?" I stood still, no rebuttal, no defense, just letting the truth do its work. Aiden tightened his grip on the bourbon glass as if trying to crush it. Yes, he abandoned me. All my life, he never cared. If it wasn't for Andrew Hawthorne, my grandfather, leaving me this cabin, I wouldn't have anything. This man, he jerked his head toward me, just wants to steal back the property my grandfather gave me. That's all. The name Andrew Hawthorne made me pause for a beat. Not because I was shocked, but because I realized Aiden had invented an entire person out of thin air. I never had a father named Andrew. Laura never had anyone in her family with the name Hawthorne. Aiden had fabricated a grandfather, a man who never existed, to make this cabin appear to be his inheritance in the eyes of his in-laws. Carmen frowned. "But you told my family you got the cabin in 2022. You even sent us that document, that deck, like 30 pages. Miguel snapped his fingers, remembering. Right. The business deck for Mountain Heritage Retreat. You said you wanted to turn the cabin into a boutique getaway. I looked back at Aiden. He didn't dare look at me. One of the Santiago friends, a tall, lanky guy, already tipsy, pointed toward the hallway. If this is really your house, then where's the main power panel? Because when we plugged in the toaster, it blew out the whole side of the kitchen. You took like 5 minutes to find it." The room went dead silent. The first cracks were no longer cracks. They were splitting wide open. Aiden laughed nervously, the kind of laugh that made even those who didn't know him well sense something was wrong. I forgot where it was because I barely come here. My grandfather is the one who knows the place." Elena tilted her head. "But earlier this month, you said you spent every summer here growing up?" Carmen looked at him surprised. "You told me you used to run up and down the wooden stairs as a kid? And you told that story about getting your hand stuck in the second-floor window latch?" Aiden opened his mouth, but didn't make it in time. Miguel dropped a short sentence that hit the room like cold water. "Aiden, are you telling the truth?" No one spoke after that. Even the Bluetooth speaker seemed to quiet down. In that thick, heavy atmosphere, I could hear the wind brushing the slope outside and tapping the window. The very sound Laura used to say felt like the pine trees sighing. Aiden tried to lean toward Maya, as if clinging to the only person who might still stand with him. "You believe me, right? I'm being framed. He's lying to tear us apart." But for the first time tonight, Maya slowly pulled her hand out of his. That small gesture cut like a clean blade. Now the lie was no longer just a lie. It was becoming the very thing choking Aiden in front of the people he most wanted to impress. And I stood there, without needing to say a single word. The moment the truth chooses to speak had finally come. I was about to say more when headlights from the highland slope sliced across the window like a bright cut. The crunch of gravel under tires had a very distinct sound, unmistakable. A police car. Someone in the group must have called them. A short siren chirped. 2 figures stepped out onto the snow-dusted ground. The red and blue flashes from the Ford Interceptor reflected across the cabin windows like cold, sharp streaks. A car door shut, and a firm, low female voice called out before they even reached the porch. "Sheriff's Department, did someone report a break-in?" The woman in front, Officer Jenna Morales, mid-30s, careful in her movements, but steady in the way only someone who has handled difficult calls can be. Behind her was Officer Murphy, a middle-aged man with a salt-and-pepper mustache and eyes not easily misled. They stepped inside. The cabin's air froze within seconds. Aiden rushed forward as if a golden chance to twist the narrative had just fallen into his lap. "Officers, here. He broke into our house. He's been stalking us for weeks." He pointed at me with a hand that trembled. Whether from fear or the nearness of truth, I couldn't tell. Officer Jenna raised her hand. "All right, one at a time. Let us assess what's going on." Murphy scanned the room and rested his gaze on me. With the experience of a man who'd seen hundreds of property disputes and family meltdowns, he instantly recognized I didn't look like an intruder. But procedure was procedure. "Sir, step over here for me." I nodded and moved a few steps toward the big window overlooking the valley, away from the cluster of people gathered near the kitchen. Officer Jenna approached, her voice lowered to a tone meant just for the two of us. "Do you have identification? And let me ask plainly, are you experiencing any mental distress? Do you have anyone who can verify you live here?" I understood why she asked. An older man walking through the snow into a cabin full of people, claiming it was his home. For rapid responders, that scenario always smelled like danger. I opened my wallet and handed her my ID. "My name is Richard Hawthorne. I left my attorney's office this afternoon after updating all my estate documents. This cabin belongs to me." Jenna glanced at the ID, scribbled notes, then asked in a softer tone, "Is there a way for you to prove that tonight? Documents or verification through dispatch?" I nodded. "Call county records. Just check Hawthorne Ridge Lodge, parcel 782, LH. Ownership records will show my name." Jenna pressed the radio on her shoulder, her voice crisp. "Dispatch, Unit 12 requesting property records verification. Parcel 782, LH. Owner claim, Richard Hawthorne." Meanwhile, across the room, Aiden sped up his talking like a man racing a clock. "He's been stalking us. I've seen him parked down the slope multiple times. He waited for us to come here to scare us. Officers, he even knows the door code." Murphy turned to him, calm but cold. "You say he's stalking you. But if so, how would he know the exact place the spare key is hidden? Under the step like that? No one would know unless they'd been told." Aiden opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Maya, who earlier stood glued to his side, now looked at him with a new layer of emotion, confusion tightening into suspicion. At that moment, Jenna's radio crackled. "Dispatch to Unit 12. Confirmed. Cabin Hawthorne Ridge Lodge. Parcel 782, LH. Sole legal owner is Richard Hawthorne. Repeat, sole owner, Richard Hawthorne." The whole room seemed to shrink for a brief, sharp instant. Elena, the always composed, elegant woman, brought her hand to her mouth to catch a gasp. Miguel, usually calm, gripped the back of a chair so hard his knuckles whitened. Carmen turned to Aiden. "You said your grandfather left you the cabin?" Aiden stepped back half a step, eyes darting, searching for an exit, for one sentence that could save him, but there was nothing left to save. Officer Murphy looked at him the way one looks at a man slowly tightening a noose around his own neck. "You said this was your home, but the records say the exact opposite." Aiden lifted his voice instantly as if volume could cover the truth. "They got it wrong. He hacked the records. Miguel roared, something I never imagined I'd hear from him. "Aiden, enough!" His voice was metal heavy. "What have you been twisting? We were about to put $500,000 into your project. We believed you." I stayed still. No need to speak, no need to intervene. The truth, once confirmed by law enforcement, was stronger than anything I could say. Officer Jenna turned toward me. "Mr. Hawthorne, do you want to proceed with a trespassing report?" I looked at Aiden. He was breathing hard, sweat beading at his temples despite the near-freezing air, and his eyes, the eyes of the boy Laura once held in her arms, were now a storm of panic and desperation. I drew a slow breath and answered quietly, "I'm still considering it." But I knew that in a few minutes I would have to make the first choice in what might become the most painful series of decisions in my life. The cabin's air grew heavy, like December snow piling on the roof. After the dispatch's confirmation, no one said another word. Only the faint crackling of the wood-burning stove remained, the sole honest sound in a room full of lies. Officer Jenna looked at me and gave a small nod, as if saying, "Now you bring everything forward." I understood. This wasn't just about proving ownership. This was the moment the truth had to be laid out before everyone, not through words, not through emotion, but through the only thing that cannot be undone: documents, records, seals, the signatures of the past. I bent down and set the black leather case I'd brought from the attorney's office onto the granite counter. The dark red seal was still intact. Thomas Whitlock, my lawyer, had closed it just 4 hours earlier. I slid a finger under the seal. The soft snap echoed through the silent room, like the opening stroke of a verdict. Aidan made a move to step forward, but Maya caught his hand and held him back. Whether out of instinct or something deeper, she kept her husband from getting too close to the truth. I opened the case. Layers of documents gleamed under the warm yellow lights, the lights Laura chose because they make the cabin feel like dusk is holding us. I pulled out the first file. This is the deed from 2009, signed by me and Laura, notarized in Pitkin County on September 10th, 2009. Officer Murphy shined his flashlight over the page. The beam hit the embossed seal, making the text official recording. 2009 stand out clearly. He nodded at Jenna. I continued, This is the notarized transfer 2014. Laura transferred her entire share to me before she passed. Another name appeared on the page, Thomas Whitlock, certifying attorney. Aidan saw the name and stammered, He forged that. He hired someone to fake it. No one in the room believed that anymore. Carmen shook her head slightly, another thin layer of disappointment settling in her expression. I drew out more documents, each one an undeniable truth. Property taxes, from 2009 until now, paid entirely by me. Cabin insurance, full premiums through Mountain Mutual, policyholder listed as me. Utility bills, electricity, water, internet, gas, all in the name of Richard Hawthorne. Murphy inspected each page with his flashlight. With every page he turned, his face grew more certain. Not the kind of certainty that means agreement, but the certainty of someone who now clearly sees who is telling the truth and who is staging a performance. Miguel leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly like a man who had just found the answer to every suspicion. Elena clasped her hands together, twisting her fingers, eyes lowered in shame on Aidan's behalf. I didn't stop. I knew I needed the final blow. The cabin's final inspection certificate from 2010. In the corner was the signature of Mr. Collins, my next-door neighbor and the site inspector for Pitkin County over a decade ago. I hadn't even spoken yet when a familiar, low voice came from the back door. "Richard, everything all right?" Everyone turned. Henry Collins stood there wearing a dark gray knit cap, his coat dusted with snow. I didn't know if he'd heard something or simply saw the police lights flooding the slope. Murphy asked immediately, "And you are?" "Henry Collins. I live at Cedar Point Cabin, about 1 stone stair away." He pointed out the window. "I supervised the construction of this cabin back then, and I can say plainly—" He looked at Aidan, the look of an older man who held no malice, but absolutely no tolerance for lies. "This is Richard's home. He built it with his own hands. His wife, Laura, chose every brick. I was here. I witnessed it." A soft clatter broke the silence, the bourbon glass slipping from Aidan's hand, landing on the Persian rug. The liquor seeped into the wool like blood. Aidan screamed, his voice cracking apart. "He's lying! They're all lying! Everyone's trying to steal this cabin!" But no one believed him anymore. No more protective glances, no more sympathy. No one looked at him as the husband, the friend, the dependable son-in-law. Only cold eyes remained, some pitying, some contemptuous, the kind of look reserved for someone who has turned himself into a joke. Miguel stood, his voice hard as metal. "Aidan, we trusted you for 2 years. We gave money, trust, and hopes for a better future. And all of it was built on a chain of lies?" Elena shook her head, eyes red. "I thought you were a good man." Maya withdrew her hand from his, this time unmistakably, decisively. She didn't look at her husband anymore. The room turned silent, not the silence of fear, the silence of a mask falling off and shattering on the wooden floor. Officer Jenna spoke, for the first time with full authority in her voice. All documents check, out, and are legally valid. Richard Hawthorne is the sole owner of this cabin. A final confirmation, no courtroom needed, no further debate required, and no need for me to say another word. The truth had spoken, and it is always the coldest one. No one said anything after Officer Jenna confirmed ownership. No sharp breath, no clinking glass, no defense. The air in the cabin thickened like cold mist on the window. Silent, dense, suffocating. It was the right moment. The moment for me to reveal the second truth. The kind of truth no cabin was big enough to contain without shame spilling out of it. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket and unlocked it with my fingerprint. The blue glow washed over my face, then over the room like a cold blade. No one understood what I was about to do. Aiden stared at me, panic clawing through his eyes as he tried to salvage any control left. What? What are you doing? I didn't look at him. I opened my banking app, the app I'd opened so many times over the years that I knew its interface like the back of my hand. The app I checked, only to watch my money drain away. The screen came up. I turned it toward the room. I want everyone to see exactly how much I've paid for the lies told tonight. Miguel leaned forward to see. Elena slowly stood, her hand covering her mouth. Carmen gripped the edge of the counter as if holding herself upright. Aiden realized what was coming, and his face turned the color of untouched bedsheets. I began reading. Clear, slow, emotionless, like a doctor reading a cancer diagnosis. 1. Aiden and Maya's apartment. $3,200 a month, I scrolled. The 2-bedroom apartment in Denver Ridgeview. $3,200 monthly, all withdrawn from my account. Maya jerked, as if someone had gripped her throat. Aiden, you told me. You said you paid for that apartment. Aiden swallowed hard. His voice cracked like glass on stone. Mia, I was going to explain, but she shook her head. You said you made $120,000 a year at the tech firm. You said you paid everything. A new crack opened in the room, this one between husband and wife. 2. Tesla Model Y. $1,040 a month, I continued. The white Tesla Model Y, long range, $1,040 a month. The person paying is also me. Miguel snapped toward him. You said the car was a performance bonus from work. Elena whispered, more hurt than angry. He bragged about that car all year. Aiden closed his eyes as if trying to hide inside the collapsing air around him. 3. Health and auto insurance. $670 a month, I scrolled. Health insurance for both of them. Car insurance. Total $670 monthly, all under my plan. No one spoke. No one dared. 4. 4 credit cards. Total debt, $18,400. I tapped the next tab. 4 credit cards. Total debt, $18,400. All auto-paid by me every month. Carmen turned away, hand to her forehead, fighting tears. Aiden, what did you buy? To owe that much? Aiden looked at his wife, eyes red, but any answer he had would only destroy the last sliver of dignity he had left. 5. Allowance, $2,000 a month. I read the final line, voice low but sharp as steel. And finally, every month I send Aiden $2,000 for living expenses, for 5 years. Maya gasped, her hand falling limp to her side, staring at Aiden like a stranger. Aiden, you said it was freelance money. You said you were good at side work. Aiden bit his lip until it bled. Maya, I'm sorry. But that apology was a sheet of paper held against a hurricane. Worthless. Total, $92,000 a year. For 5 years, $460,000. I said, over 5 years, I've paid $460,000 for my son's life. And tonight, he stood in my home, and called me an intruder. Maya collapsed into a chair. Elena covered her mouth. Carlos shook his head at Aiden as if seeing a man he'd never known. Miguel rose to his feet, his voice booming through the room. $460,000? Richard paid you nearly $500,000, and you called him a saboteur? Aiden was backed against the edge of truth. He trembled. Then he looked at me, anger, pleading, and despair swirling in his eyes. You can't do this in front of them. I looked at him, not with anger, but with a cold stillness, deeper than the snow outside. I'm not doing it. The truth is? The room fell into absolute silence, so still I could hear snow melting on the cabin roof, each drop falling like the ticking of a sentence being lowered. And there was another truth the room still didn't know, the truth behind why Aiden had been desperate enough to deny my existence the moment he saw me walk in. For 2 years with the Santiago family, Aiden had built an entirely different life, a fatherless boy, a young man who stood on his own feet since 16, a self-made man who rose by willpower and grit, not by anyone's support. He told them he started from nothing, worked sleepless nights, saved enough to buy a car, rent a home, and prepare to launch his own company. He convinced them the cabin was his grandfather Hawthorne's inheritance, so he could appear like a man with good roots, worthy of investment. That's why they believed the 30-page pitch deck. That's why they were ready to wire him $500,000, and because he had lied too deeply, too often, too long. Aiden couldn't admit I existed even when the truth was standing just a few steps away. In his wife's family's eyes, he was a self-made man. To them, he had ambition. To them, he had no father, or a father who abandoned him. If he acknowledged me, tonight, everything would collapse. The life he bragged about, the career built on lies, the good man Maya thought he was, and the $500,000 investment he was about to pocket. He never expected me to come to the cabin tonight. He never expected 2 years of lies to unravel in minutes. He only knew one thing. If he admitted I was his father, the fake life he built would collapse instantly. The room was still drowning in the thick silence of exposed truth, when Miguel, who had stood frozen like a man stabbed in the heart, suddenly reached into the leather backpack by his feet. He unzipped it and pulled out a dark blue folder, the kind used in serious business meetings. Aiden saw that folder and his face drained of all color, not because of the police, not because of me, but because of the thing Miguel was holding. Miguel did not look at Aiden. He looked straight at me, then at Officer Jenna, as if asking for official witness. Richard, this is the business plan Aiden presented to our entire family last week. Aiden blurted, Miguel, you don't have to show that. But Miguel continued, his voice hitting the cabin like a hammer on metal. In here, Aiden wrote that the Mountain Heritage Retreat Project would generate $35,000 in profit within 30 days. The whole room seemed to freeze at once. Miguel opened the folder. Inside was a 32-page business plan, printed in color, bound neatly like a pitch deck for an investment board. Carmen gasped, Miguel, don't tell me. You... Miguel nodded, eyes reddening. I believed him. I trusted him like my own son. He turned to me. We signed a pending transfer, $500,000, scheduled to be sent to Aiden this coming Monday. Aiden muttered, whether trying to defend himself or simply trying to breathe, no one knew. No, let me explain. Miguel, you misunderstood. This is all just misunderstood. But his voice fractured, every word snapping apart like rotted rope pulled too hard. I looked straight at him, not angry, not shouting, just one sentence placed on the table like a cold blade. Aiden, you really meant to deceive them? The word son landed on him like a funeral bell. He trembled, his mouth opened, but his throat tightened as if a hand were squeezing it shut. Maya stepped back 3 full steps, hand over her mouth, staring at her husband as if seeing a stranger. Aiden, you swore to my family that you had no debt. You swore you were good with finances. You said this cabin was yours. You said you only needed one last push to start your company. Miguel slammed the folder onto the table. The heavy thud made everyone jump. You wrote that this cabin was inherited from your grandfather. You used your own father's cabin as collateral for our trust. Aiden grabbed his head, staggering like a man hit by a blunt strike. Carmen looked at him, then at Maya, her eyes full of pain and betrayal. Maya, if your father hadn't come tonight, then Monday, our $500,000 would have vanished forever. Maya burst into tears like someone slapped hard. One of the young men, Carlos's friend, who had been filming everything all night, stepped forward and raised his phone. We recorded all of it, every word, every piece of proof, everything. Aiden's head snapped up, eyes bloodshot. Delete it! Delete that right now! The young man shook his head. No, this is evidence, and if you touch me, that's another crime. Carlos, the gentlest person in the group until now, suddenly shouted, voice shaking with fury. Aiden, we trusted you, and you were going to drain my parents' 30 years of savings? Aiden choked. I didn't. But no one wanted to hear him, because this wasn't just lying anymore. It had become a calculated scam, an attempt at financial theft, a betrayal of people who had opened their arms to him. Miguel slammed the folder a second time, harder. If Richard hadn't come tonight, he wouldn't just have lost his cabin. Our family would have lost everything. The young man holding the phone said loudly, This video will be saved as evidence, not deleted, and everyone will see who you really are. Aiden collapsed into a chair. His hands covered his face. His body crumpled like a building losing its foundation. The silence that spread through the cabin no longer felt like tension. It felt like a sentence pronounced. No court needed, no jury required, only the truth. Aiden collapsed into the chair, his hands covering his face. But the room offered him no space to breathe. The silence now was no longer the silence of shock. It was the silence of waiting, waiting to see what I would do. And I knew. If I didn't end everything right here, in my own cabin, in front of the people he'd deceived for 2 years, Laura would be disappointed. I walked to the pinewood table where Laura and I used to eat breakfast every winter, set my briefcase down, unlocked it, took out my phone. Aiden's head snapped up immediately. Genuine panic. What are you doing? I didn't answer. My finger slid across the screen, opening the Sonoran Peaks banking app. The blue light reflected on the faces crowding the cabin, faces that had just watched the collapse of a man who had always claimed he was successful. I tapped into recurring payments. A long list appeared. Apartment rent, $3,200 per month. Tesla Model Y payment, $1,040 per month. Auto and health insurance, $670 per month. Credit card payments, multiple accounts, monthly allowance, $2,000. Miscellaneous transfers labeled urgent needs. Aiden lurched up from the chair as if electrocuted. Don't do it. Not here. Not. In front of them. Miguel stood with arms crossed, staring directly at him. Carmen turned away, unable to bear any more shame. Maya stood frozen, hands trembling in the air. I tapped cancel recurring payment on the first line. The screen displayed, request submitted, pending 72 hours. I turned the screen so everyone could see. I didn't speak, but everyone understood. He couldn't stop it anymore. This wasn't impulsive anger. This wasn't a moment of rage. This was a decision 9 years old, born the day Laura died. Aiden choked out, "Don't do this. You're destroying my life." I tapped the second line, Tesla payment. Vehicle payment cancellation sent to lender. I could see Aiden's hands shaking. He stepped toward me, but Officer Murphy gently raised a hand to stop him. "Stay where you are, sir." Aiden turned to Maya. "Maya, I need that car to get to work. You know that. Tell him to stop." Maya only looked at him, her eyes hollow, drained of love. I tapped the third line, insurance. A notification popped up. Insurance termination, scheduled next billing cycle. Everything was logical, step by step, within financial and legal procedure. Nothing instant, nothing illegal, just banking laws, system processing times, and the rights of the account owner, me. Aiden flawed. You can't do this. Not in front of them. Not like this. And then, for the first time all night, I looked straight into his eyes. I saw a man Laura once hoped would grow into someone good, now curling in on himself like a child about to lose his last toy. I said slowly, clearly, each word precise. You made this public. I paused. I'm ending it public. The whole room held its breath. This wasn't anger. This was the final sentence. I pressed confirm all changes. Each line appeared. Processing request, submitted to financial institution, scheduled for next cycle. Each notification like a funeral horn. Aiden gasped as if someone punctured his chest. Dad, please, not in front of them. He used the word dad for the first time. Not from love, not from recognition, but from fear. Fear of losing his meal ticket. Fear of losing the fake life he'd built over 2 years. If Laura were alive, she would be crying. I shook my head. They didn't make you lose face. You did that. And tonight, you answer for it. Miguel spoke softly, not cruel, just truthful. Aiden, you lived off his money, and you told us he didn't exist. Carmen added for the first time in an icy tone. No one in this room humiliated you more than you humiliated yourself. Maya wiped her tears, staring at Aiden with no trust left. You let someone else pay for your whole life, then told me you were self-made. Aiden sank down again. His whole body trembled as if melting into the floorboards. Officer Jenna tilted her head, observing him with something like weary pity. Sir, I think you should sit down. Behind her, the young man with the phone was still recording everything, not for social media, but as evidence for the $500,000 Aiden nearly stole from the Santiagos. When I closed the banking app, the cabin grew so quiet I could hear the wind tapping against the window. Tonight, 2 people died. One was Aiden, the version of himself he'd tried to build. The other was the last piece of hope Laura had ever kept for him. I set the phone on the table and said the final sentence of this part, one everyone understood as the point of no return. From this moment on, you live on your own strength. When the cabin door opened to let the cold night wind pour in, no one said another word. The Santiago family, who had come here expecting a luxurious holiday, were now just tired, heavy silhouettes packing their belongings into suitcases. No more Latin music, no more laughter, no more champagne glasses clinking. Only the rustle of jackets, the scrape of zippers, and the tight trembling sighs of people trying not to break. Maya was the first to shatter. She stood near the doorway, hands covering her face, shoulders shaking under the weight of restrained sobs. When she turned to look at Aiden, her face blotched red, mascara streaked down her cheeks. Her eyes held the complete collapse of a woman, realizing the man she married was not the man she thought she knew. I don't even know who I married. Her voice was as thin as a thread, but everyone heard it. Miguel paused for a moment, his face tightening in pain for his daughter. Elena placed a hand on Maya's back, guiding her out the door with a gentleness filled with disappointment. Aiden stood in the middle of the room like someone abandoned in a storm, his shirt wrinkled, eyes red, hands trembling. All the pride, the confidence he displayed tonight, from the moment he said, "What is a man like you doing in our home?" to the moment he screamed about his family inheritance, had turned to ash. He turned to me, his voice hoarse, nearly broken. "Can we talk in private?" I looked directly at him. Not a tremor of pity, not a fraction of softness, only the steel truth Laura left me years ago. No, not tonight, not here. Aiden opened his mouth to argue, but my eyes stopped him. No apology could patch a void carved by 2 years of lies. No excuse could rebuild what he had shattered with his own hands. Miguel stepped in, lifting Maya's suitcase. "Let's go. Enough damage has been done tonight." Carlos opened the door. Wind from the highlands slashed into the room like a cold blade. Maya wiped her tears one last time, not looking at Aiden again. Elena followed, eyes red, not once turning back toward the cabin. Miguel gave me a small nod, the nod of a man who had finally learned which side held truth and which held deceit. Aiden lingered last, his hand on the doorknob. He turned to me, with the eyes of a child abandoned, ironically the very story he had lied about, claiming I'd walked out on him long ago. "At least, don't make this a spectacle for them." I didn't answer, not because I lacked words, but because every word that needed to be said had been said tonight. Aiden lowered his head and stepped outside. The pinewood door closed behind him. The click of the lock sounded like the seal on a file reaching its expiration date. But the cabin grew strangely quiet. I stood alone in the living room, a place that just hours earlier had echoed with laughter, music, and the entitlement of people who treated Laura's space as their playground. I walked slowly through the room, picked up the 15-year bourbon bottle, set it back in the cabinet, gathered snack crumbs from the Persian rug, turned off the string lights they had hung over the fireplace like cheap decorations. When I knelt by the liquor cabinet, I saw it. Laura's photo, its frame bent along one edge. I lifted it, wiped it clean, smoothed the broken wood. In the picture, Laura was smiling, a smile warm enough to cut the Colorado winter in half. I held the photo in my hands, and for the first time tonight, something inside my chest ached sharply. They had turned the cabin into a battlefield of trash and spilled drinks. They had opened my liquor cabinet like it was a free bar. They had sprawled across the sofa Laura used to read on every winter afternoon as if it were a resort lounge chair. They had stomped across the wooden floors Laura handpicked one plank at a time, as if trampling the memories she left behind. But the one thing that stabbed deepest was that they dared to throw her photo onto the floor like something disposable. I turned toward the fireplace, sat in the old leather chair, Laura's chair, the one she read in during her final days. The fire crackled softly, amber light reflecting on the stones, the very stones we laid together 14 years ago. I placed the photo on my lap, breathed in, then whispered, "I'm done protecting you." I wasn't speaking to Laura. I was speaking to Aiden, the person I no longer saw as a son tonight, but as a consequence. Outside, the sound of engines faded down the snowy hillside. Inside, the cabin returned to the shape Laura wanted. Quiet, clean, honest. And I knew. From tonight on, Aiden didn't lose a father. He only lost the shield that kept him from the consequences of the life he chose to build. 10 days after the chaos at Hawthorne Ridge Lodge, the snow on Aspen Highlands had turned into a thin sheet of ice, glinting under sunlight like a giant pane of glass. My cabin was still so quiet I could hear the wind whistle through the pine doorframe. Yet outside, Aiden's life was collapsing like a rotten roof crushed by too much snow. I didn't check on him. I didn't ask. I didn't call anyone. But my phone still lit up every day, proof that truth always finds its way home. On the 10th day, Miguel sent a short message. "Richard, just so you know, Maya moved back with us. She's broken, but she's stronger than your son ever was." I looked at that line the way one looks at a window, long left uncleaned, clear, honest, needing no explanation. Not joy, not sadness, just right. Maya took 10 days to leave Aiden, but only 1 second to realize the man she married had been lying his entire life. On the 12th day, Aiden wrote, "Maya won't talk to me anymore. Can you help me?" I placed the phone face down. A small decision, heavy as stone. By the 3rd week, Miguel texted again. "She filed. It's official." Maya filed for divorce. Not in anger, not impulsively, but with clarity. I read that message in the cabin by the fireplace, beneath the photo of Laura I had just rehung. No shock, no sting, Not even the pain I thought I might feel. Only the sense that Laura was beside me, her hand on my shoulder saying, "It's time, Richard." And then came the Santiago family. They didn't just cut contact with Aiden, they demanded the $7,000 he had borrowed months earlier to pay startup fees, a sum I had never heard about. But they remembered well. Aiden dodged, and when cornered, he texted me, "Dad, tell them you knew. They'll believe you." I looked at that line and understood. He still hadn't grown. He still thought I was his last shield. But this time I had set the shield down. The thing that spread fastest wasn't melting snow. It was the video. Within 10 days, the clip of Aiden standing in the cabin, denying his father in front of 11 people, calling me an intruder, claiming the cabin was our resort home, then going pale when the police confirmed the truth, circulated through community groups in Aspen, Snowmass, and even Glenwood Springs. One comment under the clip made me sit still for a long moment. The real humiliation isn't the father being denied. It's watching a grown man collapse the moment truth walks through the door he tried to lock. People didn't share it for drama. They shared it because it was a lesson. And a small community like Aspen Highlands, believe me, doesn't forget liars quickly. When the video spread, Aiden's job began to wobble. The tech company he bragged to everyone about, claiming he made 6 figures, started reviewing his file. Reality, Aiden was a remote contract worker, not full-time, with poor performance and no standing. The video raised questions of integrity risk. An email hit his inbox on the 15th day. "We are terminating your collaboration, effective immediately." No job, no wife, debts stacked high, reputation in ashes. 3 days after losing the tech job, he found work loading boxes at a warehouse in Aurora. Hourly pay, no insurance, no future. But this time, I didn't intervene. No calls, no money, no advice. I only read the messages he sent. Desperate, broken, late into the night. "I'm sleeping in a rented room. Please, Dad, at least talk to me. I'll pay everything back. Just help me one last time." They're calling me a liar. You know I'm not like that. I knew. I knew he wasn't born that way, but he became that way every time I rescued him from consequences. And now, finally, consequence found the right address. I read them all, but I didn't reply. At my age, silence is sometimes the heaviest sentence a father can give his son. I stood by the cabin window, looking down at the long streaks of snow lining the pines, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty for letting my son face the life he had built. Because I understood one thing. That night, I stopped being father. I became consequence. And sometimes, that's the only role that can save a person from himself. 3 months after the snowy night at the cabin, spring slid down Aspen Highlands like a thin layer of light. Snow melted drop by drop on the pinewood roof, revealing the grains Laura once traced when the cabin was newly finished. That morning I sat drinking tea by the window, the early season sunlight hitting her photograph and making her brown eyes glow a little brighter. My phone buzzed. An unknown number. I knew who it was before I answered. Aiden's voice came through, low, hoarse, as if for 3 months he had spoken only to the dark. "Dad, it's me." No arrogance, no trace of the voice that shouted, "Our home," only the voice of someone who had fallen too far. He inhaled, the tremor audible through the line. "I want to apologize." A long, quiet beat. Then he continued, not defending himself, not layering another lie to cover his face. "I'm living in a tiny studio, walls so thin I can hear the neighbors closing doors. I work night shifts at the warehouse, eating ramen every day. I have nothing left." His voice cracked in pieces. "Maya won't talk to me. Her family blocked me. Friends too, I know. All of it is my fault." I closed my eyes for 1 second, not out of pain, not pity, but because this was the first true sentence I had heard from him in many years. My fault. Aiden continued so quietly it sounded like he feared himself. Dad, do you think we can start over? Not money, not debts. Just, I want to know if you still want me in your life. I looked out the window. The snow was melting into thin streams down the mountainside, reflecting sunlight like a mirror. I rested my hand on the armrest and said slowly, clearly, not angry but heavy as stone, I spent 30 years catching you every time you fell, but I realized that wasn't love. It was preventing you from growing. The line went silent, still as a frozen lake. I continued, I don't hate you, Aiden. Never did. But I will not be your safety net anymore, because that doesn't save you. It makes you weak. A long breath fell from the other side, not resentful, not rebellious, just acceptance. Then Aiden asked, very small, very real, So, do you still want me in your life? I looked at Laura's picture. In the light shining on the wooden frame, I almost heard her answer. I said, when you can stand on your own 2 feet, this cabin door's always open. Not now, not on his terms, not to rescue him from the life he created, but because that is the only way for father and son to have any life left between them. Aiden didn't speak again. Maybe he cried. Maybe he didn't know what to do with the truth he'd just heard. He only said one final line, thank you for not closing the door forever. I replied, live as the man you want to become, not the man you pretended to be. The call ended. No sobbing, just the final silence. I stepped onto the cabin porch. What remained of winter snow was melting into clear streams. Sunlight filtered through the pines and fell onto the wooden boards, where Laura used to stand every morning. A sense of lightness came over me, not from cutting ties, but from setting the last boundary in place, and at that moment I understood. I didn't lose my son. I only returned him to the one place he could learn to stand, on his own feet. Some stories don't end with shouting, don't end with a reconciliatory hug. They end with light shining on the place that had been covered for years. When the snow on Aspen Highlands melted, when the spring water ran across the ground where Laura once stood, I understood something I never had the courage to accept before. Loving someone is not always holding them close. Sometimes it is drawing a boundary so both can live honestly. The night Aiden broke wasn't the night I lost him. It was the night he began to learn how to rise, not leaning on me, not leaning on the stories he invented, not leaning on anyone but himself. And if one day he comes back to this cabin door, not to ask me to save him, but to tell me he saved himself, I will open it, not out of obligation, but because fatherhood will finally have found its true shape. If this story made you pause even for one heartbeat, just one, leave a. So I know you're still somewhere out there, walking this journey with me. And if you want to hear more true stories about family, boundaries, and quiet justice, don't forget to follow the channel. I'm deeply grateful you're still here. I'll keep telling the story.